Hey everyone, welcome to my channel, Mukesh's Tech Space. If you are new here, I post video tutorials on how to set up your web applications on the AWS Lightsail platform, Azure platform, and other easy to use and set up web hosting tools and services. I also do video tutorials on WordPress tips and tricks, primarily for the beginner. So if you are interested in that type of content, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you find the videos useful, please like them as well. So in this week's video, I will continue tips on securing your WordPress website. Last week, we went through about 7 steps on securing your WordPress website. Easy ways to just apply security settings through the wp-config.php file. And I wanted to continue that video series this week in expanding to the htaccess file as well, and also functions.php file from your themes. And I think I'll be able to go through about 8 security steps this week. Before we get started on those items, let me show you some stats that you may or may not be aware of. I'm going to take you to this website, and this is a pretty popular graphic chart that has been around on the internet since 2018. So here you'll see that infected websites platform distribution. So 90% is where WordPress stands of infected websites, and that's a pretty large number compared to any of its other common open source content management platforms. Now, WordPress is a pretty popular platform, and almost 24 or 25% of the internet websites are on WordPress, so that's a pretty huge number. So it's going to get targeted quite a bit. Let me show you some additional stats here. 41% of WordPress attacks are caused by the hosting platform. So make sure your hosting provider is implementing good security practices and not leaving anything open that can allow attackers to get into your website, for instance. 52% of WordPress vulnerabilities relate to the plugins. So the advice here is that make sure you are getting your plugins from a popular or from a standard source. So the WordPress plugin repository, or if you're buying plugins, make sure that those are reputable sites that you're buying plugins from. Make sure plugins are regularly updated. So if the author of that plugin hasn't updated a plugin for quite some time, it's no longer a good plugin to use. So 84% of security vulnerabilities on the internet are from cross-site scripting. So that's 84% of all internet sites. Out of that, 40% almost is WordPress vulnerabilities because of cross-site scripting. So some of the steps that we'll go through today should help prevent a lot of the cross-site scripting exploitations. And if you don't know what cross-site scripting attacks are, I'll leave a link to a pretty good article that gives you a good knowledge on how attackers use this technique to get into your website. And then this is such a bad number right here. 44% of hacking was caused by outdated WordPress sites. So it's very important that you keep your WordPress website up to date. If you keep it outdated, then security holes that are left in older versions of WordPress, attackers can make use of. So because of these reasons, and I know a lot of you are beginners in the WordPress world, I wanted to show you quick and easy steps on how you can secure your WordPress website, protect your site, as well as protect your visitors to your site. So without further ado, let's get started. So to get started, you're going to need to get access to a couple of files on the server. The first one is your htaccess file, and the second one is your themes functions.php file. That's where we will make most of the changes today. You can either SSH into your server and use editors like VI or VIM to modify the files, or you could do them locally on your computer and then upload them via SFTP to your server. But before you go through any of these steps, back up your WordPress site, back up your database. You should be doing those regularly anyways, but make sure you back all of that up before you make any of the changes here. And I would also suggest, if you have a development site, then make these changes first on your dev site. And if everything works well, then you can make those changes on your production site. So let's get to our tip number 1. So the first tip will be to secure and protect some of the more important WordPress files on your server. So to do that, open up your htaccess file. And the htaccess file is a hidden file, and so you may not see it if you just go do ls on your server. You won't see that it's listed here. But if you do vi.htaccess, you should be able to get to that file. I don't know if I mentioned it, but if you do not have an htaccess file, you can try creating it, but it could be likely that when you installed WordPress, it was installed on something other than Apache web server. The htaccess is only supported by Apache web servers. So if you don't have that Apache web server for your WordPress site, then you won't be able to use this. So go ahead and open up the htaccess file. When WordPress gets installed, it will create some of these lines automatically upon installation, and those will be denoted by begin WordPress and end WordPress. So any of the changes that we make through this tutorial, you'll want to do this outside of that block so that they don't get overwritten when you update WordPress or make any other changes that causes WordPress to make updates to the htaccess file. Create an extra line, and then we'll paste this block of code that will secure and protect a majority of the important WordPress files on your server. If you just paste this in here, this will protect the error log, wp-config, php-ini, and several other files. So go ahead and save the htaccess file once you made these changes. And after each of the changes, it's a good practice to go and just go look at your website and make sure it's still functioning correctly. And if something is gone wrong, then you can just, that this change might have caused that, so you can back out the change and investigate it a little bit more. But this first tip will secure your important files of WordPress. Now let's move on to the second tip. So tip number 2 is to prevent WordPress username enumeration. Username enumeration, this occurs when a hacker or somebody trying to find out the users that are on your system. So what they'll do is they'll put the name of a user at the end of your WordPress URL, and if your username archive page shows up, then they know that this is a valid user in the system, and so they have, I would say, 50% of the information they need to try to hack into your website. So preventing username enumeration, when really if you're not using author archive pages, then you'll want to apply this security feature. So the next tip here is again in the htaccess file, and you'll add these 2 lines of code to that file. And what this will do is, if a query string comes in with the author name or anything tagged along it, then it will do a 301 redirect and redirect that request back to the home page. Let's head on to tip number 3 now. So our third tip will be to restrict direct access to plugin and theme files. Now, majority of the plugins and themes should not need any direct access to the PHP files in their directories. So we'll want to protect that. These 2 lines of code will take care of that. So the first one is plugins. So go back into your htaccess file. Below here, just insert this first line, which will be a rewrite rule. Basically, if somebody's trying to access wp-content/plugins and any file there inside there, we will send back a 404. Basically, it will go to a page not found, and that's what we want to do. We'll do the same thing for themes as well. Paste this line of code, and this does the exact same thing. If a request comes in for a file inside your themes directory, then it will return back a 404. Now keep in mind, this is only for PHP files. If there are some static files like text or template files, then those will be allowed. But in either of these cases, a 404 page not found is returned back to the visitor if they're trying to access PHP files directly from your plugins and your themes folder. There could be some cases if you have a custom developed plugin or some scenarios where directly accessing those files is needed. So instead of getting rid of this global line here, what you could do is make some exceptions. So for example, if there are some files or folders that you need to exclude from this rule, you'll want to put that right before the rule. So put this rule here. And what this will say is if the plugin or if the PHP file is this file here, file to exclude.php, then do not send back a 404. Instead, send back the actual file. And you can do the same thing for the theme site. Save this in your htaccess file and test your site. Make sure it still works. Now let's head on to tip number 4. So tip number 4 is preventing PHP files from executing or even being uploaded to the uploads folder of your WordPress site. Now, typically you need that uploads folder to be writable by the web server because you are logging on to the WP admin dashboard and creating new content. So you're uploading images and other files to the uploads folder to be used on your pages. But what we want to do is restrict any PHP files from being added to the uploads folder. Now, by default, when you are creating content through the WP admin dashboard, WordPress already has a security feature where it will not allow PHP files to be uploaded through the admin dashboard. But if you have a poorly written plugin or perhaps a poorly written theme, then attackers could use those security holes to save files into the uploads folder and have them executed, which is what we don't want. So let's add a security rule inside the uploads folder to prevent any PHP files from even landing there and furthermore from being executed. As we know, the htaccess file is typically found in your WordPress or your website's root folder, but you can actually put the htaccess file in any of the WordPress folders and insert rules into them. So go ahead and cd to your uploads folder and then create an htaccess file here. So vi.htaccess. Now again, if you're creating this file on your computer, then you'll just FTP into the uploads folder. And then within the htaccess file, paste this script or this rule, and this will prevent PHP files from being executed or being uploaded into the uploads folder. And that's it. Now let's head on to tip number 5. Our next tip number 5, will be to limit access to the WP admin dashboard. Now there are many ways that this can be done, but I will show you how to do that using htaccess. So in your htaccess file, add this snippet of code to your file. And a couple of places that you need to make changes is first is replace this line here with your WordPress domain name, and also these two lines to the path to your WordPress site. Now what this will do is it will allow users, authors, or anyone else that needs to get into the WP admin dashboard. However, it will prevent any brute force attacks that people use, typically using bots or automated scripts, but will allow normal users. So normal users would typically go to your website and then they'll type in /WP-admin or /WP-login, and it will allow those type of requests, but it will prevent any of the brute force externally bots and scripts that attackers typically use to hit your website. Now let's head on to tip number 6. Okay, so our tip number 6 will be pretty easy. There are a few files that get installed when you set up WordPress that are no longer needed once WordPress has been successfully installed and configured. Keeping them doesn't really hurt, but deleting them prevents sensitive information from accidentally being added to them, which could give hackers a way to understand how your website was built or what your website is built as. So it's just safe to delete them. And those 3 files are readme.html, and the wp-config sample.php file. So we'll go ahead and first delete these two. So just do rm-rf readme, and then do the same thing for wp-config-sample file. And then the third file will be in your wp admin folder, and you can safely remove this file once the WordPress installation is set up successfully. So get rid of these three files. They're not needed past the installation stage, and that'll just keep your WordPress a bit more cleaner. So now let's head on to tip number 7. So in our security tip number 7, what we want to do is prevent SQL injections. So we want to prevent attackers from using SQL injection techniques into getting access to your website or injecting any kind of malware onto your website. And what this will do is prevent any kind of malicious attack by a hacker and trying to gain over your site or insert any kind of malware onto your site using SQL injection. Now let's head on to our last tip, tip number 8. Alright, so the final security tip will be to add secure HTTP response headers to the WordPress website. Adding these headers will prevent a lot of the cross-site scripting or injection of malicious JavaScript type of attacks on your website. Go ahead and open up your functions.php file for the active theme that you have on your WordPress site. So again, before we start this activity, go ahead and back up the functions.php file. As always, just back up any of the files that you start to modify in case you run into some issues. You can restore quickly. Our first two that we'll add will prevent any kind of JavaScripts to be loaded from other than from your website. So this will tell the browser to always load the files only from yourself, so from your own WordPress website. Don't load them from any other external third-party locations. The next header item that we'll add will prevent your website from being loaded in an iframe. So a lot of times hackers might use this where they will make up a domain that's very close to your domain. They'll register that, they'll create a page, and then they will try to insert your website as an iframe. The visitor thinks that they're on your site because it looks like your website. Here we go. So that's our third header item. Now the fourth header item will be to prevent cross-site scripting attacks. We'll prevent any kind of cross-site scripting attacks. So add these two items. Again, what I would suggest is after you add each of these header elements, save the file and then test your website and make sure that it's still functioning correctly. The next header item will be to force the browser to use the HTTPS only mechanism or HTTPS protocol for your website. And if you don't have HTTPS your website just yet, check out some of my other videos. I think I have several steps on how to set up HTTPS using the Let's Encrypt mechanism. So this code right here will always tell to load your site on HTTPS, and then the following code snippets that we'll insert will protect and secure your cookies for your website, and that's right here. This will tell the browser to trust only the cookies that are set by your server, and that the cookie is available over HTTPS as well. So this will provide that. And there's one more actually that security item that we need to add for older browsers, and right here the content security policy. So for older browsers we have to add one additional header item, and that's x-content security policy, and then the default source itself. So hopefully you found this useful. These were the 8 security tips. Most of them again were part of the htaccess file, so make sure that you have Apache running that enables htaccess. I think if you are running other web servers like nginx, then there is an nginx configuration file, and you can possibly apply all of these same security mechanisms in your nginx configuration file. I may do a video in the future for nginx configuration, but I'm just not too familiar with it, so I'm familiar with htaccess a lot. If you found this video useful and you found these security tips useful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, share this video out to others. And if I missed any security steps, or if you know of any more that you could apply to WordPress, please put them down in the comments below. And with that, until the next video, take care.